Okay. Thank you, Bronwyn. Thank you all for hanging around through to the end, and thank you to the conference organizers. This has been a great conference, and it's a real honor to be at this podium. In my talk, I want to reflect upon the cultivation of these tools that we've been discussing over the last few days, and I hope, without crossing into the line of panegyrics, I can hint at what it has meant to have had Richard Wolbers as our resident guide at the Winterthur University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation. Just how did we get to where we are now? What did we know, and when did we know it? And how exactly should we go about reconstructing a history of treatment over hundreds of projects spanning nearly 4 decades? I might be tempted to go the oral history route, but with all due respect to my colleagues Richard and Joyce Hill Stoner, who have experienced all of these changes firsthand, oral history might be too imprecise in this case. We do, however, have a wealth of information in our treatment documentation: dates, formulations, sometimes narratives explaining reasoning. And it's really advantageous here to focus on student projects because they encompass if that works, a huge data set. And life as a student really embraces this culture of problem solving and experimentation. And lastly, students tend to be verbose, overly so in some cases. They don't want to miss a single detail, but for our purposes here, we don't want to miss a single detail either. But treatment documentation comes in many, many different forms and has changed so much in 40 years. What problems might we expect to encounter? Well, aside from simple matters of format, we have the human element to consider: individual writing styles, typographical errors, misunderstandings of concepts. And we also have archival problems, physical condition of the document, existence of duplicate reports, et cetera, et cetera. So how can we extract useful data? Well, without going into too much detail, because I don't really have much time, I started with the physical documents. I undertook a scanning project, resulting in a batch of PDFA files. To get everything, including handwritten notes and annotations, into searchable text, I ran those PDFAs through an open-source optical character recognition platform called Tesseract. I then fed the resulting text files into a Perl script I wrote that was meant to identify project numbers, dates, and recipes, and also find keywords and excise a certain number of words surrounding each instance of those keywords to make sure that we're not missing anything. All of that excised data was dumped unstructured into a spreadsheet, and using a data transformation application called OpenRefine, I was able to clean up the data, fix typos, fix OCR errors, and get everything into a useful state, a single, clean spreadsheet. Now, I'm not a computer scientist. I'm a paintings conservator who dabbles in coding. In reality, every single step along the way, I had to do some amount of hand checking and manual data entry. If I were working with a computer scientist specializing in natural language processing and cognitive computing, this process would no doubt be more elegant, robust, and automated. I'm making some important assumptions here, namely that reports are complete and accurate to the best of the students' abilities, and that experimental trials may be omitted from final reports. Most importantly, though, we're missing data from student work on objects that did not receive an Art Conservation Program or ACP number. We're missing data from research projects, and we're missing some really important data from student publications. That said, I was able to survey over 1,700 folders encompassing over 1,900 individual objects, resulting in a data set of 238 projects with 341 gel formulations. It's a pretty good representation of treatment activity at Winterthur. Now, this bubble chart shows student use of gels over time. The data were binned by academic year, and the size of each bubble relates to the frequency of use that year. Each row on the chart represents a type of gel formulation, with each color representing a gel medium. For instance, the dark blue dots in the lower half of the chart are all of the different cellulose ether preparations. If we were holding this conference 15 years ago, we might be spending more time discussing solvent gels. And the upper right of the chart contains those recent, greener, surfactant-free systems that Richard has been advocating over the past decade. Although it's neat to see the ebb and flow of each of these systems, what I feel is extraordinary about this data visualization is that it shows how we've adopted many different tools over the years and we've abandoned very few, suggesting perhaps that we've been able to solve increasingly granular problems and be more demanding of our ability to perform targeted cleaning by exploiting the strengths of each of these different systems. Now, it should come as no surprise that the number of students in each specialty and the comfort level of the students' major supervisors will skew the adoption and application of different gel systems. Richard's training was in paintings, and I have heard that he's pretty comfortable with gels, which may account for the strong representation of paintings in the data. In the next series of slides, I'll point out some key details for each of the gel systems represented. On each slide, total gel usage over time is shown in dark green, and individual gel usage is shown in bright green. Cellulose ethers were the first gelling material in use at Woodpack, although there were a few instances of Ruhrmann's wax paste emulsions prior to 1980. Virtually every specialty offered as a major area of study at Woodpack is represented with cellulose ethers, as cellulose ethers appear to have had the broadest range of applications as a predictable, well-understood material. That said, once other gel systems were adopted at Woodpack, use correlates really well with gel activity in the paper studio. Now, it may come as a surprise that agarose gels were reported next. Richard suggested their use in paper conservation applications by 1985, and these gels were the subject of a student research project at the time. However, this is an instance where the material failed to gain traction with the major supervisors in that specialty, and so it remained a dormant option until recent years. This next group, viscous emulsions of xylene, a surfactant, usually Triton, and an aqueous phase, might stretch our definition of a gel. However, I've included them here as they are the first reference to the phrase solvent gel in the ACP treatment record. This is one of the few tools introduced by Richard that I can say has been abandoned completely in favor of newer, safer, greener materials. Solvent gels incorporating carbapol and ethymine or armine gained immediate traction upon their first reported use in 1987 and made up a significant proportion of gel use at Woodpack for the next 2 decades. Some of the applications for carbapol gels are better addressed by aqueous systems capable of self-emulsifying a solvent phase, which explains the drop-off in use over the past decade. Acrylamide gels, acrylamide bisacrylamide gels, are something of a peculiarity represented by only a few data points over Woodpack's history. I find it interesting that they are sometimes graded and used similarly to what Paolo Cremonesi illustrated on Monday with agarose gels. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention lapinite gels, which have been used primarily as a poulticing material in inorganic objects conservation treatments. And now we get to the materials that have made our working lives a little easier and perhaps a little safer over the past decade or so. The first of which is xanthan gum, which was introduced at Woodpack in 2006 in a project that I was fortunate to work on with Richard concerning the cleaning of iron-stained marble surfaces. The ability of xanthan gum to remain stable at nearly every pH and create stable emulsions with a fairly wide range of solvents has made it an attractive option for a number of cleaning applications. Concurrently, Richard began introducing Pemulin TR2 as a thickener and emulsifier, and these systems replaced carbapol gels in a lot of applications early in this decade. In more recent years, xanthan emulsions have found slightly more use, however. It's really interesting to note, though, that a similar emulsion system using Pemulin TR1 appeared as a technical note in a UKIC newsletter in 1992. Why did it take us so long to adopt these particular materials? I'm not quite sure. And finally, we have the silicone particle emulsions, represented here by Velvasil Plus. I know for a fact that Velvasil and KSG are underreported in the data, as I recall Richard experimenting with Velvasil in 2007 and sharing samples with Philip Klausmeyer at the Worcester Art Museum, where I was completing my third-year graduate internship. And those were the good old days when GE Momentive would send you a kilo for free if you asked them. Now for some general trends and conclusions. First, the data support the narrative that we've adopted a pretty nice array of tools that allow us to tackle difficult problems with greater specificity. Most of those tools remain in service, even if their applications have become more specialized. We've seen a significant push towards greener, surfactant-free systems, and there are a number of surprises, including the early use of agarose and the realization that our adoption of Pemulin was quote-unquote late. This analysis confirms and refines some of the timelines highlighted by Richard and Chris Stavridis earlier in the conference. Future work for the expansion of this data set includes the addition of student research projects and publications, seeking out collaboration with computer scientists interested in natural language processing. Can we improve the automation of the workflow and adapt that workflow to other sets of raw data? And if so, it would be really, really interesting to compare notes with other training programs internationally. Now, aside from successfully reconstructing a history of gel use at Woodpack, I want to reveal an ulterior motive for taking on this study. I believe now is the time for us to think critically about the benefits that might be gained by opening access to our treatment and analytical documentation, doing so securely and to researchers within our field only. Recent advances in natural language processing and cognitive computing would allow us to gain a more complete understanding of our practices and our findings over time and globally. And we could probably do so without having to migrate data or to require anyone to change their documentation pipeline or to adopt new internal databases. Within a single institution, if that'll pop up, one might be able to ask and answer some really tough introspective questions. And externally, wouldn't it be really nice to log into a secure server and get immediate answers to questions like, what institutions have cross-section samples of paintings by Anthony van Dyck? Give me a list of every painting known to have been subjected to the Pettenkofer process. What pigments have been identified in pastel drawings by Degas? Give me a map showing the use of paraloid B67 as a varnish over time, and so on. It's a dream, but it's achievable if we have the will and if we have the confidence and the trust in each other. I hope that my small pilot project, reconstructing a history of gel use at Winterthur, helps you to believe in that dream too, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you.